I owe so much to Barry Sheene, and people always state, oh, all I ever did was getting Barry Sheene's slipstream or hang on to his coattails, and trust me, they were a good set of coattails, and it was a hell of a good slipstream. I'm going to guess it was £5,000 or something like that, which actually was probably a year's salary at least, or probably double a year's normal salary for anyone. It was like being in Alice in Wonderland. They weren't all called Alice.
I've been on a mission to try and get myself a ride for next season, and in doing so I've been looking at all aspects of sponsorship and motorbike racing. So this week I thought it'd be cool to take a look back at the 70s and 80s to see just how motorbike racers used to earn their money back in the day. I roped in Steve Parrish, who used to race in the 70s and 80s. He was Barry Sheene's teammate, and he was really honest and open in this interview. He let me into exactly what it was like to race bikes back in the day, before there was social media and before there was any rules really. Grab yourself a drink, it'll be worth watching the whole thing, I promise. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, we're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year, so I'd really appreciate it if you did. Firstly, before we go anywhere, can you just introduce yourself to people that don't know who you are?
Right, hi everyone, I'm Steve Parrish. I'm now celebrating 44 years without a proper job. I started off racing amateur motorcycles, went on to race professionally, went on to run a team, Loctite Yamaha team for a number of years, moved on from there doing a bit of rider management, moving on from there to a career in truck racing, then moving on probably to commentary work, working for BBC, ITV, and still do a bit of the commentary work. So I'm fairly experienced in motorsport, I guess you could say, having raced motorbikes, cars, go-karts and trucks. So that's me, Steve Parrish. Nice to see everyone.
So let's go right back to the very start. Go on, let your coffee finish.
Sorry to interrupt. That noise was my express coffee machine starting up.
These motorbike racers.
The lovely people from Express Coffee, and I'm just going to hit the button. So I've got a coffee coming along. So it might be a little bit noisy, but I do apologise.
That's all right. So let's go back to the very start, and I've experienced what it's like to get into racing now. How did you get into racing back in the day?
I think, I guess it's probably a bit the same now. The only difference with me getting into racing, unlike it seems a lot of riders, and you would be one of them, I didn't have anyone in my family that was involved in racing. I didn't have a wealthy family at all. My father died when I was 12 years old. I was a horrible little child that got into nothing but trouble, got expelled from school at 15 because I liked riding my motorbikes around the fields. And when I say motorbikes, they were BSA Bantams that I found from an old shed or something. But I had a group of friends that liked motorbikes, and we all rode on the road. Probably when I was about 14, actually got stopped by the local copper. But by the time I was 16, when I had a legal motorcycle on the road, I went to a pub and we all liked motorbikes. So we decided to start a team up. And I was 18 by now. I'd got a job. I was an apprentice mechanic, so I'd saved up enough money to put a little bit in towards getting a bike. And between 3 or 4 mates, we bought an old Triton. One was a paint sprayer, one was an engineer, one had a few more pounds than I didn't sort of pay for the bike. So there was another guy who was an electrician, and we built a race team, I guess, and I was the allocated rider because I was the biggest lunatic on the road, I guess. So that's sort of how it started. So I was actually late in going racing. I was 18 years old, which by today's standards is way, way too late. But kind of that was where it was back then. There was 1 or 2 exceptions, perhaps Barry Sheene being one because he came from a motorcycle family. But that was it. And I guess by the time I was 22, I was a professional rider, which actually was quite young in those days, but you'd be nearly finished by now. Well, no, not finished, but, if you're not starting out winning some club, academy, schoolboy thing when you're 12 or 14, you had it, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So it's vastly different, it was.
Yeah, your story there is quite funny because it's so similar to my dad's. My dad's dad, my granddad, died when he was 14, and he started racing just because of a few of his mates. It was quite funny when he said that. So back then when you were racing, how much did it cost for a season's racing?
Wow, that's such a tough question because I can't equate it. We're talking pounds, shillings. So not much because it was just this old bike we built up was done out of bits and pieces. There was no such thing as eBay. It was exchange and mart, I think it was in those days, where you bought an old engine and you bought a frame and some wheels. I'd say the whole bike probably cost £100, I guess, something like that. And we had an old beat-up ex-greengrocers, van. So we had to put some petrol in it because we couldn't even run red diesel because it was petrol, I think. So that was probably siphoned out of my mum's car or something. It was literally, pennies. It was nothing. You turned up with an old bag of rubbish, which most of the people at Vemsey or Newmarket and District or Loutham District clubs had in those days. The real professional and the people that were winning probably had a Manx Norton or something, so that was kind of a bit upmarket. But it did quickly move on from that, £100 bike and 10 quid to go racing, because your entries were a fiver then. I don't know what the hell they are now, but they were £5, I think. By the time I'd finished that first season, I sort of was doing okay with the bike that I was on, and I decided to buy a Yamaha, which is quite interesting. Well, I think it is, because that Yamaha that I bought in 73, first year was 72, I've just got it back. I used to own it, then I sold it, and then I used to own it, and I've sold it. Anyway, I bought it back for the third time, and I've got it in my workshop, and I'm restoring it now. So that was the TD2B Yamaha that propelled me into this life of not having a proper job.
And that's amazing you've managed to get it back now. And then you quickly went from there. I think it was 77 when you led the British Grand Prix. Is that right?
Yeah, I knew you'd bring that up. Yeah, well, more importantly for me, 77 was my dreams came true for a number of reasons. One is that someone was going to pay me money to go racing. Two, I was going to be teammates to my sort of childhood hero, Barry Sheene. And I know there was only 3 years difference in our age, but he started racing when he was about 15 and I started when I was 18. So we had like a gap of 7 or 8 years that I'd watched him racing and kind of watched his progress and everything else. And so it was kind of getting paid, riding with Barry Sheene and having a fantastic factory motorcycle, because I, in 77, had Barry's bike from 76. He'd done a season's racing and won the World Championship. I didn't quite aspire to that, but ended up fifth in the World Championship, which actually, considering, like you rightly said, I crashed whilst leading the British Grand Prix, it would have got me up to third in the championship, and that would have been my first ever year learning the circuits and first year going away. I got on the first aeroplane of my life at the beginning of 77 to go to the Venezuelan Grand Prix. Doesn't get much wetter behind the ears, does it?
And what did it feel like leading the British Grand Prix? Because that's just every British rider's dream.
Well, stupidly, I was already thinking about winning it. A lap and a half to go. You know what it's like. You count the prize money and the fame and glory and everything else with 70,000 people or whatever it was at Silverstone, and I was already counting that down until I came round to start the last lap, which brought me home to thinking what I am, because Barry Sheene was there because he'd broken down hanging a pit board out which said gas it, which I went over the start-finish line giggling and smiling and laughing and fell off at the next corner. So he was absolutely right. He must have been telepathic. But in my defence, and I do have a genuine defence, mitigating circumstances, it started drizzling with rain. And I was the first one to arrive at Cops Corner and got the damp when down. John Williams, who sadly is no longer with us, inherited the lead, and he had something like 3 seconds over Pat Hennon. Got to the next corner, he saw me, slowed down, went to the next corner, or the tight one, I think it's called Beckett's then. He crashed, and Pat Hennon got gifted the win. So, it was. I was still thinking I was dreaming when I was sliding down the track, when you're thinking you're going to wake up. But I did wake up and walk back, and then to add insult to injury, I think Rex White fired me there and then. So that was the end. That was the end of a good day, really. Or started off being a good day.
From hero to zero. And when I was looking at old pictures of you, because I was doing a bit of research for this interview, the one thing that strikes me about racing back then is that when I look at a picture of your leathers and bike, your leathers have pretty much just got Suzuki written on them, or there's an oil sponsor, or there's hardly any. If you look at modern day bike now, there's sponsors everywhere. Why was that? What was the reason?
I guess a couple of reasons, really. Very, very, very difficult to find sponsors outside of the industry, because, like you say, you probably had Champion, Shell, whatever, maybe Reynolds Chains or something like that. So you could get them to sponsor you, but you didn't get any money. You got product. I did get a bit of money from Shell, I think, sort of as things progressed a little bit more. So it was extremely difficult to find them for two reasons. One is that nobody knew who anyone was apart from Barry Sheene. And that's sort of outside of our world of motorcycle racing. People that ask you what you do for a living, I go, well, I race motorbikes. They go, oh, do you get like very muddy? You know, you're going on motocross or where you riding speedway. And you try and explain it, and they still looked at you rather vacantly. And you said, oh, Barry Sheene. I went, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. And to a certain extent, outside of our relatively small world, people probably still have to mention Valentino Rossi, don't they? You know, when you're starting to explain what you do for a living or how it all works. So it was difficult. You got personal sponsors, and I think that year in '77, I had when I say a personal sponsor, I got a caravan given to me by a local building company called Erith Building Supplies, and that would be about it. But I guess the difference was that I wasn't expecting to earn a lot of money. Like I say, I didn't expect to earn a lot of money, but we got good start money. We got prize money and start money, not for the Grand Prix, but for the international races. Even in '77, I was probably being paid £1,000 per meeting to just turn up at, and it got higher and higher. But the reason you felt, well, you wanted to be a world champion, but your status in the world championship kind of decided what you get paid by the circuit owners internationally. And it wouldn't just be in the UK, it might be in Holland, it might be in Belgium, it might be in Germany, it could be in Italy. All these smaller events would pay you accordingly, and it would be a brown envelope. I think I'll pass the statute of limitations to get nicked for this, but it would be, you go to Chimay in Belgium, be given an envelope with £2,000 in it, which could buy you a good car.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more money to be earned from start money and from prize money. Someone sent an old program to me the other day at Mallory Park, and it was 1,000 guineas or £1,000 to win the Shell Sport race at Mallory Park. So that was a lot of money.
And what year was that?
77, 78, 79. It went all the way through. I think start and prize money started to dwindle around the mid-80s, sort of 82, 83, something like that. I can't honestly remember, but by then, motorcycle racing was being televised. Of course, 77, 78, maybe 79. The only television was at the Grand Prix you were at by perhaps the Belgium TV company, or maybe ITV or BBC might cover the British Grand Prix, but nothing else was televised.
Yeah. Not
at all. There was no television whatsoever. Trying to find clips, and I did find one in the end of the British Grand Prix when I went and fell off, but it just, there wasn't a kind of series. There was no, the World Championship wasn't covered as a series. It would be done by local TV. So hence, again, very difficult to find sponsorship.
Yeah. I asked what year it was because I was laughing to myself, because in 2016 I won the race of the year at Mallory Park, and the prize money then in 2016 was £1,000. So that
was it, right? Yeah. Well, you imagine 77, 87, 97. Yeah, I mean 30 years down the road, and it's the same. More than 35 years down the road. It's just quite ridiculous that was the case. And there was even bonuses. I think it was the Transatlantic Series. We got paid very well. I mean, I got £3,000, I think, to do the three events: Mallory, and Alton Park. And then there was a bonus of £10,000 or something if you won all races. And I think Barry Sheene nearly did. He fell off at the hairpin at Mallory Park, and Roger Marshall went and won one of the races, so he lost out on that. But yeah, that you could survive as a privateer, and I did, on prize money and start money. And an awful lot of riders, that was their budget for the year, was what they were going to earn.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense to me now, why riders, that is the difference then, because riders now are covered in personal sponsors, because that's how they make their wage up. There is no start money or prize money in most of the classes now, so that makes sense. The next thing we talked about is Barry Sheene a couple of times, and I've watched plenty of movies on James Hunt and what racing was like back then. Was it like the movies make out? Was it as special as it looked? Or was it better?
Rock and roll.
Yes.
It was really. I'm going to tell you a very quick story, because I was, about 5 years ago, I was hosting a night at Mercedes-Benz World down in London at Chessington, and Giacomo Agostini was a guest of honour, and we were in this big auditorium, and there must have been 700 people in there, hanging on every word from Giacomo Agostini, and I am the interviewer. It was for the Brooklands Museum group or something, and my first words, a bit like yours just then, I said, Giacomo, I mean, I had some great times, sort of started off in the late 70s, but you were in the 60s and early 70s, and it was sex, drugs and rock and roll, and you went really quiet for probably, seemed like 10 minutes, but it was probably about 40 seconds, and I'm thinking, Jesus, I've gone too far here, I've said the wrong thing. And he just looked straight back up after thinking for this long, and he just went, just the sex. Because I said sex, drugs and rock and roll, so he just the sex. But it was great in that I guess you enjoy your youth a lot more and you remember a lot more about it. But it was a bunch of like-minded people travelling around the world, hence it was called the Continental Circus, mainly around Europe in fairness, in vans with caravans. You had a race nearly every week, because if you weren't at the Belgian Grand Prix or the German Grand Prix, you were at Chimay or Nivelles in Belgium or doing an international event to earn the money. And you stayed in the same campsites, you stayed at the same lake or the same river or the same coastal resort, and you just travelled around like a bunch of mates, having an awful lot of fun and nothing else to think about but riding motorbikes and finding pretty girls, really. And that was what your life consisted of. And you went home a couple of times in a year to race in the UK and restock your caravan or whatever you would do and carry on. So it was an awful lot of fun. But and it's a big but, at the end of that season, it wouldn't be unusual for maybe 3 or 4 of your mates not to be there. It was so dangerous.
Yeah.
Because people forget an awful lot of the Grand Prix circuits were tantamount to the Isle of Man. They were street circuits. Finland was a street circuit. Belgium was a street circuit. Raced at the old Nürburgring. A lot of the tracks were just as dangerous. And even if it wasn't a street circuit, it had Armco barriers about 1 metre from the track edge. So, unfortunately, and maybe that's why we had so much fun, is because you didn't know what next week was going to bring you.
Yeah, it's more like doing the TT every week rather than just once a year. Yeah. Very
much so, yeah. And we were wearing leathers that were bloody hopeless, really. I had a pair of leathers that I fell off at Mallory once, and they had lycra spandex down the side of them. They literally fell off me when I stood up. I stood there in my underpants. You were wearing this ridiculous stuff. Nava helmets. You might have been wearing a flipping tin hat on your head. Gloves were like golf gloves, so you were forever scarred and big lumps missing out of you. But that good equipment wouldn't have saved you back then, because you were hitting trees and houses and telegraph poles. So It was just the way it was, and no one really complained until there was a riders' strike at about 79, I think it was, and the riders finally got together and started deciding that we didn't want, not so many should be dying, and that's where IRTA started off, really.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I remember being at a motorhome it was Kenny Roberts' motorhome, 79, 80 at Belgian Grand Prix, and everyone had decided that 2 things. One was that we weren't getting paid to go to Grand Prix. It was like 300 Swiss francs, which would be, I don't know, £200 or something like that to go to a Grand Prix. Didn't pay for your diesel. And secondly, the circuits were just ridiculously dangerous with no runoff areas, and that's honestly where it all kind of kicked off. Barry Coleman Andrea Coleman's husband was the guy that sort of got it all together initially, and then Mike Trimby got involved. So IRTA kicked off from everyone deciding that A, we weren't being paid enough, and B, we shouldn't be dying as much.
Well, and it's done a good job now. It does an amazing job with the Trackday Society.
I say to people now, motorcycle racing is always going to be dangerous, but the penalty was far bigger than the crime back in those days. A small mistake wasn't a trip into the barriers, into the air fence or the gravel trap or whatever. It was just hoping and praying that you didn't hit that curb or tree or fence or whatever it was. So, yeah, it did a good job, and it changed the life of motorcycle racing, I suspect you'd say. And that happened in Formula One in earlier days. I think it was probably Jackie Stewart in the 60s and early 70s that cottoned on to this fact that we shouldn't all be perishing in fires and hitting barriers. So something that was a long time coming, but thank God it has.
As a bike racer back then, did you mix with the F1 drivers much, or was it still quite separate?
Yeah, I think probably more so, quite honestly, because their Formula One was massively dangerous as well, certainly in the 50s and 60s. And we were all sponsored by Shell and Texaco, and you'd end up at different functions and launches and odds and ends. And I mean, I used to mix a lot with all the F1 guys, and it would be the BBC Sports Personality thing. Before they had crowds coming in, it was just a kind of closed shop, and it would be a night of getting together with Martin Brundle and Mark Blundell and Derek Warwick and guys like that. And I would go to the British Grand Prix and walk around the pit area and sit in their garages. Not that you can do any of that now. So I think it was probably closer in some ways with F1, and motor racing in general was closer because there wasn't all the restrictions of, you've got to have this special pass to go here and that one there. You just ride up and go and see the guys.
Yeah.
So I think probably that we mix far more with speedway and motocross guys. You don't go out motocrossing with top motocross riders probably in the winter months. So in some ways it was a kind of tighter knit community.
Yeah, that's cool. And then you made the switch to truck racing. What brought that on?
That was to try and keep out of the job for even longer, I guess. And again, I owe so much to Barry Sheene, and people always state, all I ever did was getting Barry Sheene's slipstream and hang on to his coattails. And trust me, they were a good set of coattails, and it was a hell of a good slipstream. It was like being in Alice in Wonderland. They weren't all called Alice. So, but he was the guy that inspired me to go racing properly, I guess you could say, helped me an awful lot throughout my career, and started truck racing for me because he, at the end of his career, DAF Trucks sponsored him for his motorcycle racing. If you see his sort of HB Suzuki or whatever in those colours, they had big DAF stickers on the back, and they supplied a truck for him and paid him money. And when truck racing turned up, they asked him to do the first truck race at Donington Park, and I wanted to do it because Barry and I used to race a lot on motorcycles, but we did the odd car race, like celebrity car races, and I think every time I raced a car against him, I beat him. Now, arguably, most of the time, not every time, most of the time he raced on a motorbike, he beat me. So I was keen to get against him on 4 or 6 wheels. So I went to Mercedes-Benz, suggested I had a Mercedes truck, and competed in the first truck race at Donington, and I did, and I think I finished second or third, beating Barry, and it all went from there. So that was another kind of turning point in my career, and that was while I was still racing bikes, by the way. That was 1984 or 5. And I straight away realised that it actually paid better. I didn't go to hospital so much, and I could carry on doing it for a lot longer. So it triggered something in my mind to think maybe there's another career here, and it turned out it was.
Yeah. And then, like myself, you like having a laugh, but you do tend to push the boundaries a lot further than I've ever pushed them.
I don't mean to. It just happens. I've been a victim of circumstances.
So you've got 2 number plates. If people don't know, what are the number plates in your car, and what is the message behind these plates?
The message was to stop my first wife that I've now got rid of driving my cars around. So it was Pen 15, which people thought read penis. I don't know where they got that from, but it was PEN15, and my car outside's got 60CK on, and some people think that looks like cock, but I don't know. Anyway, my first wife didn't like driving those cars around, so that way I kept her out of my nice cars, and she had her own car. I did get stopped by the police on numerous occasions, particularly with Pen 15, and I remember one particular occasion, it was the Lincolnshire police somewhere up near Lincoln decided on a cold, wet night to pull me over on the A1, which was hugely dangerous, and explained the gap between the N and the 1 was not the right distance that it should be, and I explained to them it was a cold night, and they didn't appreciate my joke at all, and I ended up nearly going to court. But the chief constable of the Lincolnshire police actually phoned me one day and said, this is going to be ridiculous. We're going to be made to look idiots. If you would just go and have your number plate spacing changed, then we'll drop the whole case. And they did. So that was the end of that. But yeah, it was good fun. And, I think it makes most people smile. I had 1 or 2 people write me letters and say it was disgusting and they didn't like it. But I think 99 out of 100 people thought it was quite amusing. Yeah. And they were given out by the DVLA, so why shouldn't I use them?
Yeah. And my other favourite story of you is when John Hopkins was struggling to get home on a flight. What happened there?
Well, John Hopkins has never ever bought me a beer for that, and he does owe me one. John had crashed at the 2004, I think it was. I'm sure it was 2004 Motorbike Grand Prix. He got wiped out by Loris Capirossi, who torpedoed virtually every American in the race. I think it was Roberts Jr., I think it was Colin Edwards, John Hopkins, you name it. Everyone got wiped out. And Hoppo broke some ribs and a collarbone. I'm sure it's collarbones and ribs. Anyway, have you raced in Japan?
Yeah, in Motegi, yeah.
All right. Okay, right. Well, I must admit, I never really got on with Japan. I mean, I admire all the people. They make some great motorbikes. So I just found it like, I'd never been to Mars, but it seemed like I was in Mars when I was out there. And I found it a little strange to be out there. So myself, Charlie Cox, were kind of keen to get on the first flight back. I was working for the BBC covering the Grand Prix. And so were most people. I think it's like, get the hell out of there, get back to Europe. And the main flight was the British Airways, and I can even remember that it was a BA 007, went out of Narita Airport, Japan, back to London, and it was the first sort of flight back to Europe. So there'd be Spanish, Italians, riders, mechanics, press, you name it. Everyone was crammed on that plane to get back at 12 o'clock on the Monday morning. And Hoppo turned up late, got his luggage, through and everything else, jumped on the plane, couldn't put his briefcase up in the locker. And the flight director the bloke came up there and was helping out, and the stewardess and this and Hoppo, like an idiot, explains to him he's a Grand Prix rider trying to show off, I think, and he'd broken his collarbone and some ribs and was keen to get back to Europe. Anyway, they went to the captain and reported that he'd got broken ribs, and it was British Airways' policy not to fly people with broken ribs in case of a punctured lung with the pressure changes and all that. And by this time, we'd worked out that we were going to try and chuck him out. And in fact, he was remonstrating that he didn't want to get off because he needed to get back. But it was their policy not to fly him, so we were going to throw him off the plane, then go and look for his luggage. We would then be 2 hours late leaving, and I'd got meetings. So I just thought, I'll be a doctor for the day. And luckily, my business cards, still to this day in my heady paper, have got NLA and M on them. And it looks like I'm a titled person. It's also got PhD, which also looks like I'm a titled person, but the actual NLAMN stands for no letters after my name because I've never got any. And the PhD is when I did some Pizza Hut delivery. So, it looks the part. Anyway, the captain starts talking. I said, I've examined Mr. Hopkins, and he said perfectly okay to fly. So the captain said, well, look, as long as you're a doctor sat near him, that will be fine. You've just got to write this. I'm going to write on the back of a menu. Dr. Parrish, PhD, NLAMN, has certified that Hopkins is okay to fly. And we'll go. And sure enough, that was it. Shut the doors and off we went. We pushed back and took off. I think it's 11, 12-hour, 13-hour flight. Everything was going smoothly, apart from my producer, Belinda Rogerson, that worked for the BBC, was going nuts that I shouldn't be pretending to be a doctor whilst working for the BBC and all this kind of shit. And I explained that I worked for the BBC Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was Monday, so off. Anyway, it was all going well until the cabin director comes up, taps me on the shoulder when I'm trying to get some sleep to say they've got a problem at the back of the plane, at which point Susie Perry nearly wet herself laughing. Charlie Cox was hysterical. My producer was going nuts even more, and I thought I was going to myself because I was probably going to have to deliver a baby or sort out a heart attack. And I was a bit concerned. I'd watched Holby City and casualty programs, so I knew a little bit about doctoring. But anyway, it turns out, thank God, he took me back to his little meeting room to explain what was going on, and all it was a drunk at the back of the plane, a Spanish bloke, absolutely causing all sorts of problems with the other stewardesses and all the other passengers and everything else, and he needed me as a doctor to certify this bloke was drunk. So I did that. I said, I'm actually more specialised in orthopaedics, but under the circumstances, I'll go back and help you out. On one absolutely definitive, you do not interrupt me for the rest of this plane. I don't care flight. I don't care what's going on. I've got to get my sleep because I've got operations to do when I get back. And I go back there, and sure enough, there was Manuel causing all sorts of problems. I certified he was drunk. The story goes on a bit because it was only one of the Dorner cameramen that knew me, so I had to deny the fact that I'd ever seen him before in my life. But they did arrest him when he got to Heathrow, poor old Manuel. Anyway, so just a little tip to anyone out there, whatever, do not pretend to be a doctor on an aeroplane because it can catch you out.
Well, and I've just had another brainwave here after you clearly didn't learn your lesson that well, because we were leaving the Misano Grand Prix one year, me and Dad, in a hire car. And
oh, yeah.
We were sat in it was like a thunder or an ice storm. It was a massive hailstorm. And we were sat in this traffic, going to miss our flight. And we sat there, and I remember my dad going, yeah, in the good old days, I'd have been straight down the hard shoulder. That's where I would have gone. I went, all right, yeah. Anyway, 5 minutes later, this other hire car arrives, and it was none other than Steve Parrish, ambulance written in the front of his hire car, driving flat out down the thing, waved us in, and we followed you through.
I know. I do remember actually, because I always carried this big sign saying ambulance because I knew it helps you get through the traffic and everything else. I didn't have my blue light with me as it happened that weekend. But there'd been a massive, like would have missed our flights, wouldn't we? There's no doubt. There'd been a huge snow ice storm and all these cars had skidded off the road and everything else. And I actually won't forget, I do remember getting to the scene of the crime and the accident and everyone else. And sort of as we gingerly went past them, they were all expecting me to pull over, I think, and get out and help. I had no choice but to just take the sign down and clear off, get to the airport. And we made it in the end, didn't we? So I don't think I've ever got a beer from your old man either on that. So
No,
people owe me a bit. No, he does owe me one. So does Hopkins. So maybe we can have a nice party when this COVID gets going.
Yeah.
I fully understand how difficult it must be hugely difficult. And it hasn't not crossed my mind for this year, worrying for riders at any level, I guess, or certainly at BSB level, at the club level, trying to find sponsors, particularly as you can't take people for hospitality, and that's always been a big catch to get someone involved. Luckily, there is still great television, and hats off to BSB and the organisers. Fantastic TV from Eurosport and the other channel I complete, the Quest, is it, that shows it? I can't remember. But it's great TV. But it must be very difficult to go to a potential sponsor who probably wants to bring guests for hospitality and be at the races when we're not even sure what's going on. We certainly knew that you couldn't do it last year. So I suspect that it's going to be a tough year for a lot of people out there from a budget finance point of view.
Yeah, exactly. Keep working hard. That's all we can do.
Yeah, I guess that is all you can do. I don't think I've got any tips for anyone out there. But again, back in my day, before there was certainly social networking and media and as much TV and everything else that's going on, I used to bung, and I remember giving him £1 a week, which was quite a lot of money to the paper boy that lived in my area around Royston, Hertfordshire way. £1 a week he got if he came back and gave me the addresses of all the great big houses that he delivered motorcycle news to, because everyone took the motorcycle news went out to something like 150, 200,000 people back in those days. And I needed to know anyone that got any money that read motorcycle news so I could write them a letter to try and get some money out of them. And it actually worked on one occasion. I did find someone that had a company and a business that did it. So, but I don't think you're going to find a paper boy anymore now, and you're certainly not going to. Motorcycle news, unfortunately, doesn't go to so many people. So I don't think there's any tips out there. You just got hit lucky, really. I got Loctite, by the way. Loctite was a big sponsor for motorcycle racing, for my team, Rob McElnay's team, and everything else like that, by taking my bike paintwork to a paint spraying shop in Welwyn Garden City, and the guy that was there told me that they get loads of cars coming in from a company called Loctite up the road. He knew the managing director, and I got in touch with him. So sometimes it's just serendipity. You just happen to bump into the right person at the right time.
That's always been a big thing for me when I've got new sponsors. It's always been knowing someone that's either the managing director or really high up in the company. I've had limited success of just writing an email to a random company and just popping up. It definitely helps when you know someone there. Yeah,
I think sometimes you're better off, rather than writing letters, is going to an expensive posh nightclub in London or something like that and bumping into all the city financiers or something like that than you are writing letters. It's exactly that. Meeting people that have got budgets to spend and want some extra special hospitality and being involved in something. That's probably the only way you're going to do it.
Yeah. All right, wicked. Thanks very much, Steve. Appreciate that.
Absolute pleasure. Good luck with your ventures. I know you're doing your best to get out there, and I hope to see you back out there. I'm sure we're going to see your brother out there. And what's your dad doing? How many hats has he got on this year?
We don't know yet. He's under wraps till the new year starts. He hasn't actually got many hats at the minute, so
hasn't he? Oh, right. He's normally got quite a few different hats on. But...
yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, I wish him luck. I'm not going to be supporting you because I'm sat around doing very little at the moment, simply because all the things that I would normally be doing, a bit like yourself, are not happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm restoring old motorbikes. Not doing a very good job of it, but I'm doing my best.
Well, and myself, that keeps you busy at the minute, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Hi, Taylor. Take care. Good luck with everything.
All right.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll be back next week with another video.